In the early winter morning of 1995, a woman was woken up by her dog barking. She flipped on the light switch and put on a dressing gown and slippers and went downstairs to check out what was going on. When she reached the bottom landing, the door was clearly ajar, and there was actually someone standing in it. She gasped as she thought that it must have been a burglar trying to get in, and so she quickly flipped on the light, but as she did that, the scene that just unfurled right in front of her eyes was something out of her worst nightmare. And soon enough, her whole life would be turned upside down. But as always, before we get started, my name is Andrea Scott, and I retell stories that are based on true events that you probably have not heard of yet. So if that's something you might like, then please do stick around because that's what I do every week. Now, viewers' discretion is very much advised because this content is quite graphic. But now, go make yourself a very nice and strong cup of chamomile tea, and let's get into today's story called The Odd Number Out. It was a nice summer day of 1976, and a young bride named Petra was getting ready for her big day. She was just about to marry a wonderful man named Jaromir that she had known for several years and madly fell in love with. The ceremony would be small, just the closest friends and family, but to Petra she could not wish for more, as at the end of the day she would be marrying the love of her life. After the wedding, the young couple moved to a modest house that was set in this very beautiful part of Trutnov, which is located to the north of the Czech Republic. And so the couple would be living among all these tall, beautiful trees with a small river at the end of their garden. Petra and Jaromir could not be happier, and soon enough they would start their own family when Petra would give birth to their first child, and a couple of years later after that, the couple welcomed their second and final child. And so, at least for a while, the family of four would live a very happy life. However, all of this started to soon change. Petra was exhausted from all the duties in the house as well as her workplace, and she also found that Jaromir was not as keen on staying in with her and the kids after returning from work, because he preferred to go to the pub for a few beers with his friends. And so, slowly but surely, the couple started to drift apart, and Petra would even start casually seeing other men. In the end, Petra and Jaromir agreed to spend as little time together as possible, and would work out a schedule so that only one of them would be in the house at one time, and they would sort of just pass each other by on the way in and out. This did work for a little while, but of course it would start taking a toll on the two children because they didn't quite understand this whole arrangement between their parents and began asking a lot of questions about it. The situation would carry on for several years, until one day in early 1994, when Jaromir finally had enough. He thought that something needed to change, especially for the sake of their children, and so he completely remade the front-facing room located on the first floor of their house, so that Petra could start working from home. Jaromir had a feeling that his wife was cheating on him, and so he wanted to put a stop to this by limiting how much his wife would be spending outside of the house. This of course made Petra very angry and resentful towards her husband, and so the situation grew even more strained and bitter. And as you can probably imagine, soon enough the pair would be arguing pretty much every day. Jaromir would always accuse his wife of being unfaithful to him, and Petra would complain about the fact that he was no longer interested in spending any time with her, or that he didn't help her with looking after the house and the children. The situation would get so bad that Jaromir started being violent towards his wife, and so Petra finally started thinking about getting a divorce. She didn't want to lose her husband, but equally she could not stand living with him any longer, especially now that he started hitting her and verbally abusing her. A few weeks later, Petra was abruptly woken up by the family's dog, viciously barking at something on the ground floor of the house. It was still pitch black outside, and so at first Petra didn't know what time it even was. She rolled over in her bed and switched on her small lamp standing next to an alarm clock on the nightstand. She looked at the clock and realized it was 6:03 a.m. Petra immediately thought that it must have been her husband spooking the dog by mistake when he was on his way to work that morning. The dog was not stopping, however, and so Petra put her robe and slippers on and slowly walked downstairs calling at the dog. But as she was coming down the stairs, she could feel the room getting colder. She landed on the ground floor and saw that the dog was growling at the front door, which was wide open, letting the cold air in. And there, in the doorway, stood a dark figure, clutching something in their hand. Petra got scared and flipped on the large hallway light, but when she realized what she was looking at in front of her, she almost immediately fainted. There, in the middle of the room, sprawled on the floor lying in a pool of blood, was her husband. His head, torso, and arms were covered in cuts and stab wounds. The scene was so gruesome, and there was so much blood everywhere, on the floor, on Jaromir, and the walls, that Petra felt like vomiting. But then, the figure in the doorway slowly stepped into the light of the room, and Petra noticed that they were clutching a knife. She let out a scream and crumpled over her husband's lifeless body. When Petra regained her consciousness, she was lying on a couch in the living room, surrounded by a few of her neighbors. They had heard the dog barking, and when Petra had screamed, they rushed towards the house to see what was going on. They saw a man running off, leaving a trail of some red liquid behind him, and when the neighbors reached the house, they saw Petra collapsed on the floor over her husband's blood-soaked body. They called the police and ambulance immediately, and now were waiting for them to arrive. Petra wanted to get up to rush over to her husband's side, but one of the neighbors shook his head and insisted she stay lying down. They had checked for Jaromir's pulse, but they couldn't find one. Petra started sobbing and repeated over and over again that she didn't understand what was happening. A couple of minutes later, the police sirens could be heard getting nearer. 2 local officers stepped outside and looked at a house in front of them. They of course heard from the dispatcher what the neighbors had reported seeing inside, but they just couldn't believe that something like that could have happened right on their doorstep. This was a small community, and the type of crime the police would usually be called to was shoplifting or some late-night brawls at a local pub. But this was different, and they wanted to get to the bottom of it as soon as they could. The officer stepped through the hallway and immediately froze. They have never seen so much blood in their life. Lying motionless on his back was a man they had known for a long time. Jaromir's eyes were wide open, and his expression was full of terror. It was clear that he did not see the attack coming. It must have taken him by a complete surprise. There were stabbing wounds covering his body everywhere the officers could see. The attack seemed to have been vicious and personal. There was no weapon inside, and so they assumed it must have been taken away by the killer. The officers stepped over Jaromir's body so they could speak with the person who called the dispatcher to report this. They had learned that the neighbors came rushing in as soon as they heard Petra scream, and that they also saw a man running away into the woods. But as he was quite far away, they couldn't give a better description of the man to the police. The police thanked the neighbors and said that for the time being they could go, but to be sure to get in touch if they could remember anything else. The neighbors nodded and left the house. The next person the officers wanted to talk to was Petra. They could see that she was visibly shaken, but it was still very important they spoke to her right there and then. One of the officers sat next to her on the couch, while the other crouched down to her level, and they explained that they were very sorry to be asking her now, but they needed to know what happened that morning so they could piece it all together. Petra, who was still very upset and was sobbing, began telling them about how she had been woken up by the dog, and so she decided to go check on it, when she found her husband lying dead in a hallway. The police nodded and asked if Petra could recall seeing another man in the house. Petra shifted a little bit and said that yes, there had been a man standing in a doorway as she was coming down the stairs, but that she didn't know who the man was as she had never seen him before. The officers then asked if Petra could think of anyone who wanted to hurt her husband, but again she just shook her head and looked away. The police made a note of everything, but they had this feeling that Petra was not telling them everything she knew. They ultimately decided that, for now, they would look around the house some more, and most likely ask Petra to come down to the station once she has recovered a bit. So the officers expressed their condolences to Petra, and said that they were going to take a look around the scene a bit more to see if there were any clues that could help them in finding out who the killer was. Petra said that was fine and continued to sob. The officers, however, didn't find anything else apart from a faint trail of blood heading into the woods. They followed it as far as they could, but with no bloodhounds on hand, they didn't get very far. On the way back into the house, they spoke with the coroner, who had arrived at the scene and was now investigating Jaromir's body. Everyone could see that Jaromir was murdered in a very brutal way, But equally, the officers were shocked to find that his body was stabbed 27 times, which ultimately led to Jaromir's bleeding out. The coroner said that Jaromir stood no chance, as some of the wounds were so deep that it would only take a couple of minutes for the victim to bleed out, and he had suffered multiple of those injuries. His body would be taken in for an autopsy, but for now, the police needed to start their investigation elsewhere. In less than a week later, one of the officers was sitting at his desk going over the notes from the interview he had just conducted. The information had been clear, and the officer was now starting to put an image together of what he believed happened to Jaromir. When the officers first spoke with Petra, they immediately sensed that she must have been hiding something from them, and it would turn out that they were right. But when they found out what the thing was, they couldn't actually believe that something like that could have happened in their small town, because they only heard about such stories from the movies and TV. Based on the interviews conducted during this investigation, here is what really happened in the small community near Trutnov in 1995. The killer silently crept towards the house, making sure that nobody saw him. He stopped by the front of the house, keeping close to the wall, and looked at his watch, which read 5:45 a.m. The killer knew that Jaromir was scheduled to work that morning, and any minute now would be likely walking out of the house. He wanted to come talk to him for some time now, but it was only this morning that he actually picked up the courage to do so. The killer was so fed up with Jaromir and wanted to straighten a few things out, as he just could not take it all anymore. A few minutes later, the light inside of the house got switched off, and the killer heard the key inside of the front door opening it from the inside. The killer wasted no time. He quickly stood up and rushed towards the door, and when it opened, the killer was looking into the very surprised face of Jaromir. The killer pushed Jaromir inside of the house and said that he was there to talk to him. But Jaromir immediately raised his voice and told the killer to get lost, otherwise he would call the police. The killer hated the fact that Jaromir dismissed him like that, and so he shoved him deeper inside the hall, telling Jaromir to be quiet and listen to him. But Jaromir was having none of this. He quickly pushed the killer back towards the open front door, and he wanted to kick him out. The family dog came running into the hall and began growling and barking at the intruder. All of this filled the killer's head with rage. He did not come here to be pushed around like this. And so, in a split-second decision, he pulled out a knife he had in a pocket of his coat and slashed at Jaromir with it. Jaromir didn't see this coming, and so the knife slid across his chest, ripping into his clothes and skin. Jaromir shrieked and, in a panic, tried grabbing onto the knife to get it out of the killer's hand, but the killer just twisted it, cutting into Jaromir's palm. Then the killer kicked Jaromir away from him, which made Jaromir stumble and fall down, and after that, the killer jumped onto Jaromir and pinned him down with all his weight. The attacker started stabbing and cutting Jaromir over and over again. Jaromir was desperately trying to get away, but he just could not get from underneath that man. He tried calling for help, but as he was trying to shield his head from the knife, he was practically making no sound. The dog was still barking and even tried biting at the killer's arms and legs, but the killer paid it no attention. He would slash and stab at Jaromir for the next few minutes, which to the killer felt like hours. He was finally putting an end to it all, he thought. After the killer recognized that Jaromir was clearly no longer moving, he sat up straight and looked down at his victim. This wasn't his plan at all, but at least now, he and Petra could be finally together forever. But then the killer heard footsteps coming down from the stairs, and so, afraid that Petra would see him, he stood up and aimed for the door. The dog continued barking and growling, but was no longer trying to go for the killer. And so the man walked towards the front door, but then the light suddenly came on. And when the killer turned, he was met with Petra's piercing scream. He knew that she had recognized him, but there was nothing he could have done about that now. So, as the killer's lover fainted over her husband's dead body, he turned around and ran for the woods. The killer had no plan forward, and he actually felt terrible about what he had done. He was too afraid to go talk to Petra, as he had no idea how she was going to respond now that she knew that he had killed her husband. And so, after a couple of days, the killer decided to contact the police and come out clean. The killer, aka Yuri, was a young soldier that was just after returning from serving in Yugoslavia. Just to explain, Yugoslavia was a country that was made of what we today know as Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. And Yuri worked within the United Nations Protection Force that was trying to keep the peace during the Yugoslavian wars between 1992 and 1995, as Yugoslavia was actually dissolved in 1991. Yuri was currently living in the same town as Petra, and so one afternoon when Petra was doing her grocery shopping, the two struck up a conversation. They quickly found out that they had a lot to talk about, and so soon enough they would start meeting up for coffees and lunches and would become good friends. Because Yuri was currently unemployed, basically living off his army pension, he had all the time in the world to be spending with Petra, and she loved the attention she was getting from him. It was exactly the break she needed from her miserable life at home, and Yuri provided just that. As time went by and Petra's marriage was not getting any better, herself and Yuri were getting closer and closer, and would eventually find themselves in a romantic relationship. Yuri would take Petra out all the time, and the pair were spending practically every free moment they had together. And soon after that, Petra would bring Yuri home every night her husband was away with work. Just after 3 months of dating, the new couple wanted to start a proper life together. But of course, Petra's current situation was not allowing it, and so with still no divorce in sight, the couple really didn't have another way to go forward. This really bothered Yuri. He hated the fact that Petra was so unhappy at home, and that she was being abused by her husband, who did not want to let her go. And so Yuri started to hatch a plan in his mind. He asked Petra what time her husband usually left for work in the mornings, and he decided to come by to confront him. But of course, the situation did not go as planned, and Yuri ended up killing Jaromir. Because Yuri came forward to confess to everything, provided a detailed account of all his actions, and also expressed deep regret for what he had caused to Jaromir, he ended up being sentenced to 11 years in prison. As for Petra, even though she had recognized Yuri as the killer, she was never charged for withholding this information from police, and so never served any sentence herself. And so this marks the end of today's episode. If you liked it, then please check out some of my other videos that are already published on my channel. I will be releasing a brand new episode every week, and with that, I will see you all very soon. Until next time.